Walter Voss stood at the back of the auditorium in his good shirt, the only one he owned without a bleach stain on the sleeve, and listened to two women 3 rows ahead whisper to each other without bothering to lower their voices. "Isn't that the janitor? What's he doing sitting up here with the families? I heard his daughter's actually graduating. Must be proud, I guess, considering." They laughed, quiet, careless, the kind of laugh people give when they've already decided someone doesn't matter enough to notice listening. Walter said nothing. He'd swept this same auditorium floor for 11 years, knew every creak in these seats, had polished the brass plaque on the east wall so many times he could have redrawn it from memory without looking. He also knew something none of these families in their pressed suits had any idea he knew. On stage, the principal shuffled through diploma envelopes, working toward the valedictorian address, and Walter felt his chest tighten in a way it hadn't in 18 years. In exactly 4 minutes, someone up there was going to read a name out loud that was going to change how every person in this room looked at him. Remember the plaque on the east wall? It's been hanging there for 11 years, and almost nobody's ever asked who paid for it. If you believe the people quickest to dismiss someone usually understand the least about who they're looking at, stay with me, because tonight's about to prove that. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Walter was 52, a widower for 18 years, since his wife Diane died in a car accident on a rain-slicked overpass when their daughter Aria was barely 4 years old. Diane had taught 10th grade English at Ashford Academy for 6 years before she died. The kind of teacher students remembered decades later. The kind who stayed late helping kids who couldn't afford tutors, who kept a drawer of granola bars for the ones who came to school hungry. After she died, Walter couldn't stay in their old house, couldn't stay in the town where every street corner held some memory that undid him. He took a job as a custodian at Ashford Academy instead, not because it paid well, it barely paid anything, but because it was the one place he could walk the same hallways Diane had walked, straighten desks in the same classroom she'd once taught in, and feel, in some quiet, aching way, like he hadn't lost all of her. He never told Aria the full reason he'd taken the job. She grew up assuming her father simply worked at her school because it was convenient, never knowing the deeper truth folded inside that convenience. Remember that he never told her. That silence matters more than it seems right now. 11 years earlier, in Diane's memory, Walter had gone quietly to the school's development office and asked how a person might start a small scholarship fund. He had almost nothing to give. A custodian's salary stretched thin raising a daughter alone. But he began anyway, $20 a paycheck. Then 50 once Aria got older and needed less, building slowly towards something that mattered more to him than anything else he owned. He asked the school to keep his name off it entirely. He didn't want recognition. He wanted Diane's name on a wall where students would see it and maybe, in some small way, understand that someone here had once cared enough about kids who were struggling to leave something behind for them. The school agreed. The Diane Marlowe Memorial Scholarship had quietly funded partial tuition for 11 students over 11 years, most of whom never knew who Diane Marlowe had actually been, and none of whom ever connected the janitor who emptied their classroom trash cans to the woman whose name funded their education. Marlowe had been Diane's maiden name. Walter had insisted on using it specifically so no one would ever trace the scholarship back to him. Aria was 18 now, graduating at the top of her class, having worked harder than almost anyone in that auditorium understood, splitting her time between advanced coursework and part-time hours at a grocery store to help with bills her father never fully explained the size of. She loved her father fiercely and simply, in the uncomplicated way children love a parent who has never once made them feel like a burden, even when the math clearly hadn't always worked in their favor. She'd chosen, months earlier, to legally add her mother's maiden name to her own for the graduation program. A quiet gesture she hadn't discussed with Walter beforehand, wanting to surprise him, wanting some small way to carry a mother she barely remembered forward into this moment. She had no idea that name already meant something to this school. Neither did Walter, sitting in the audience, know she'd done it at all. The principal stepped to the podium, diploma cover in hand, ready to announce the valedictorian. "Before I read our valedictorian's name," she said, "I want to note that this year, for the first time in the scholarship's history, the recipient chosen for the Diane Marlowe Memorial Scholarship is also our top graduate. A remarkable coincidence, or perhaps not a coincidence at all." A murmur ran through the crowd. Walter's spine went rigid. "Our valedictorian," the principal continued, "graduating with a 4.1 grade point average and a full academic scholarship to State University. Aria Diane Marlowe Voss. The auditorium went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when something doesn't immediately make sense. Walter's hands had gone still in his lap. 2 rows ahead, one of the women who'd whispered about him minutes earlier turned slowly in her seat, her expression shifting from confusion to something closer to disbelief. "Marlowe," she said, half to herself. "Wasn't that?" An older teacher near the front. Mrs. Halloran, who had taught at Ashford for over 20 years, rose halfway out of her seat, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Diane Marlowe," she said, loud enough now for the rows around her to hear. "She taught here, she taught my daughter. She died years ago, a car accident. I remember the whole school grieving. That scholarship's named for her." She turned, scanning the crowd, and her eyes landed on Walter, sitting still and pale in the back row. "Walter," she said slowly, "Diane was your wife." The whisper spread through the auditorium in seconds, row by row, the particular fast, uncertain current of a crowd realizing they'd misunderstood something all at once. Before we go any further, it matters to understand what those 11 years of $20 and $50 contributions actually meant. Because the answer is bigger than one scholarship fund. There was a boy named Marcus, 3 years earlier, whose single mother worked 2 jobs and still couldn't cover his tuition without the Marlowe scholarship, who went on to become the first person in his family to attend college, and who still sent Ashford Academy a card every December that nobody there had ever thought to show the janitor quietly emptying the mailroom bin down the hall. There was a girl named Priya, 5 years earlier, whose family had immigrated with almost nothing, who used to eat lunch alone in the library some days, and who Walter had noticed once, quietly, without saying anything, leaving an extra granola bar on the library counter some mornings the same way Diane once had in her own classroom drawer, a habit he'd carried forward without fully realizing he was doing it. None of these students knew Walter's name beyond the custodian. None of them knew that the woman whose name funded their education was married to the man who fixed their broken lockers and mopped up their spilled lunch trays. That's usually how quiet kindness works. It rarely announces itself in the room where it's happening. The principal, sensing the shift moving through the crowd, paused, looking toward the back row. "For those who may not know," she said carefully, "the Diane Marlowe Memorial Scholarship has been funded anonymously for the past 11 years by a member of our own staff. I believe it's time that person finally stood to be recognized properly." Every head in the auditorium turned toward Walter. He sat frozen for a moment, 18 years of quiet grief and quieter generosity suddenly exposed under bright stage lighting he'd never once stood beneath in 11 years of working this building. Slowly he stood. "I didn't do it for this," he said, his voice unsteady, carrying awkwardly without a microphone. "I did it because my wife loved this school and loved these kids more than almost anything. I just wanted some part of her to keep taking care of them, even after she couldn't anymore." The room was completely silent. On stage, Aria stood frozen, diploma still in her hands, staring at her father across the length of the auditorium, understanding for the first time exactly why he'd taken this job 11 years ago. Exactly what he'd been quietly building the entire time she'd grown up thinking he simply worked here because it was convenient. She walked down from the stage before anyone could stop her, diploma still clutched in one hand, and crossed the auditorium floor to where he stood, ignoring every eye in the room. "You never told me," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want you to think I did it for credit," Walter said. "I wanted it to be about her, not about me." "It's about both of you," Aria said. "It always was." She hugged him there in front of the entire graduating class, in front of the 2 women who had laughed about him 20 minutes earlier, in front of every family who had spent 4 years walking past a janitor's cart without once wondering who pushed it. Mrs. Halloran approached them afterward, eyes still wet. "Walter, I had no idea. All these years, I thought the fund just came from some anonymous donor with money to spare. I never imagined it was you, giving up your own paycheck for it." "I didn't have money to spare," Walter said quietly. "I had time and I had her memory, and it turns out that was enough, a little at a time over enough years." A year later, Aria, home from her first year at State University, returned to Ashford Academy to speak at the scholarship's annual recipient dinner, a tradition the school started the same year Walter's identity became known. "My mother taught here for 6 years before she died," Aria told the room. "I don't remember much about her myself, I was too young. But I know now that my father spent 18 years quietly making sure her kindness kept going, one paycheck at a time, without ever once asking anyone to notice. I used to think I inherited my work ethic from studying hard. Now I think I actually inherited it from watching a man push a mop cart down these hallways for 11 years, Never once complaining, never once explaining himself, just quietly making sure other kids got what they needed. She looked toward the back of the room, where Walter stood in his good shirt, the same one from graduation night. Some of the most important people in a building are the ones everyone walks past without looking twice, she said. I got to go home with mine every night. I think that makes me the luckiest person in this room. Some names carry more weight than the people reading them out loud realize. And some of the quietest people in any room turn out, if you ever bother to really look, to be carrying the heaviest, most beautiful things of all. If this one reached you, tell us in the comments about someone you walked past every day without knowing their full story. Welcome to Heartverse. We're glad you're here.